now. Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Carrie Graves, and I am the Executive Director of NAMI Metropolitan Baltimore. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first of our series of mental health education webinars for faith leaders. We are so incredibly grateful that you have joined us this morning. The last year has been challenging for us all and for our faith community, whose stability is relied upon, especially in times of turmoil. This year has been particularly difficult. Places of worship have had to close, then reopen, then close again, and then open again, all while navigating the increased needs of congregants. You are all relied upon to be a trusted resource. What will happen next? How do I overcome the loneliness that I'm feeling? Should I get vaccinated? How do I cope with the sense of loss I'm experiencing? You navigate these questions and more every single day. For more than 35 years, NAMI Metro Baltimore has provided education, support, and advocacy services to improve the lives of the 1 in 5 people impacted by mental illness in our community. We have services for peers, for their family members, and for their communities. And we've kept going throughout this entire challenging time. We're currently offering all of our free support groups, classes, and education programs online. We launched the Mental Health Education Conference for Faith Leaders 6 years ago as a way to reinforce the critical role that you play in providing mental health support in the community. Our presenters come from different faith traditions and will use their unique backgrounds to help illustrate the topics that they will cover during the series. The information that we share is meant to be helpful to faith leaders in building or growing your mental health teams, but the information isn't exhaustive. So if you have a best practice tip that has worked well for your mental health team, I encourage you to share it in the chat during this webinar, and please don't hesitate to reach out to Clarissa, our Director of Programs, who you'll hear from shortly, to be included in our other faith leader learning opportunities. Mental health challenges are unfortunately on the rise exponentially. We want to thank each of you for all you do to support your communities, and we're just so grateful that you've chosen to spend your morning with us to expand your understanding of mental health and to find new ways to promote wellness in your community. I hope that these topics will further your ability to confidently navigate the road ahead as we work to recover from this crisis. Thank you all again so much for being here today. And over to you, Clarissa.
And I'm muted. Anyway, thank you so much, Carrie. Okay, so without delay, I will begin to share my screen, and then I will also give a brief bio of our presenter for today. And hopefully you can still see me. So really quickly, let me just make sure that this can. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. You already heard from our executive director. Then I will bring greetings, and then you will hear from our presenter for today. So very briefly, let me tell you a little bit about our presenter today. Guy Robinson, bishop, pastor, educator, musician, and mental health theologian. Guy Robinson is the author of Critical Collaboration: Pastors and Mental Health Professionals as Partners in Care to Urban African-American Communities. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Bishop Guy Robinson for his presentation today. Bishop Robinson.
Thank you so much, Director Clarissa, and to Executive Director Graves, and to the entire NAMI organization. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share such critical information and an exchange as we are doing today. Greetings to everyone who is a part of this webinar. So very grateful again for this collaborative effort to come together as this village for such an important cause. Without further ado, I'm going to talk about, again, critical collaboration, faith and mental health professionals as partners in community care. And I echo that this is not exhaustive, but just hopefully enough to provoke critical thought and engagement so that we all can be better. The thematic verse that I submit just to launch us off is found in the Christian tradition in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23. And it says, "Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved." The New Testament, or koine, or common Greek, of each of those: spirit, soul, and body, pneuma, suke, and soma. And it's interesting that both the New Testament Christian tradition, as well as the psychological disciplines, share the suke history from Greek language in common. It's from suke that we get the word psychology, suke and logos, or a word about the soul, or the reason or rationale or logic of the soul. And so in the Christian tradition, it is the things of the spirit, or the pneuma, that guide and guard the heart and mind, or the suke. And as a person thinks in his or her heart, so they become in their observable behaviors. If that isn't an argument for cognitive behavioral postures, I don't know what is. But that's going to serve as our verse for our time as we continue. And I want to talk about three areas rather, that are critical to our discussion today for the remainder of our time. That is re-envisioning, revising, or re-envisioning faith and mental health professionals as collaborators, or which really means co-laborers in the First Thessalonians ecosystem of anthropological care, this tripartite or three-part anthropological care of the whole human being. And so I want to look at us working as, or re-envisioning us as, collaborators. And then secondly, recognizing signs of faith and or mental health concerns or crises in our respective context of service. And then thirdly, third part of today, I want to present on awareness, or being aware of thresholds of referral for specialized care. If we are collaborators and working together, at what point and what are some of the thresholds at which we could say, hey, it's time to call for some help. So I'll start right in with part one, re-envisioning the relationship between pastoral and mental health professions. Here's my working thesis. I submit for your consideration that it is critically important that faith and mental health institutions envision and engage each other as collaborators, again, co-laborers, in an ecosystem of caregiving. I have there that little emblem there, kind of looks like a chemistry class, really. But if we surround people with these four areas, one is faith, understanding that we are innately faith beings, and that can be strongly argued philosophically. But I define faith as that which fills confidence, that fills the gap between statistical probability and epistemic certainty. Faith kind of fills that gap. We often talk mostly in terms of statistical probability, particularly in scientific language. And what fills the gap between statistical probability and the elusive appetite we have for absolute certainty is something called faith. So I want to talk about that we supply this faith piece to us as people. And then we are beings for mental health and medical health and socioeconomic factors, because we are indeed interdependent subsystems. And so these four areas: faith, mental health, medical health, and socioeconomic health. How do you do that? In order to do that, we may have to re-envision, we may have to go back to the future. And you have to be of a certain age to appreciate the Michael J. Fox movie reference there, but I may be telling my age. But to re-envision requires us maybe to go back to the future. There's a profound statement from the psychologist Archie Smith in Journal of Religion and Health, who says, originally, the concerns for spiritual and psychic health were united. For example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the prophet Isaiah, who's a prophet, but he prescribes an ointment made of figs for the ailing and emotionally distraught King Hezekiah. And Hezekiah recovers from this combined spiritual and medicinal care packaged in the prophet Isaiah. So originally, the concerns for spiritual and psychic health were united. But today, that linkage, Smith says, is rare. Religion and mental health are often seen as autonomous, unrelated, if not competing and conflicting systems, with psychiatry assuming a superior role. And so we're asking the question, which we have on the next screen, is what would happen if, instead of being compartmentalized, instead of faith institutions having an isolated presence, understanding that in a complex society like ours, the division of labor is tantamount to effectively operating as a society. But can we envision ourselves perhaps as separate lanes on the highway that's going the same way, that we're all going towards or reaching for the same destination, but we have respective lanes? And instead of the compartmentalization in excess, perhaps we could see ourselves a little bit like that Venn diagram. When we take this, what I've kind of termed to be an ontological intersectionality, where spiritual health and mental health and physical health all are understood to be different disciplines in terms of study and applied praxis to some degree. But there are moments, like in this Venn diagram, where they are integrated. And though we study them separately, the human body operates much more interdependently, where systems affect systems and systems depend on other systems. And so I kind of am asking the question, what would happen if we envision, or as we continue to envision, us as being interdependent disciplines in an ecosystem of care? Perhaps if that has been elucidated by nothing more than the pandemic that we currently are dealing with. And as we see on the next slide, the pandemic has combined with postmodernism plus a pandemic. It can be argued it's equaled or created a spiritual, a pneumatic, a soul and body crisis. Though these areas may be thought of as independent study disciplines, they are certainly, it can be argued, or I submit, interacting and engaging and, if you will, triggering one another and healing one another, perhaps, in our makeup as people. Of course, the postmodern pandemic, the COVID pandemic, is a physical crisis. So it certainly is somatic from the Koine Greek of our First Thessalonians reference. It certainly is a bodily concern with physical concerns and health disparities. It certainly does elucidate pre-existing medical conditions, certainly does raise respiratory and cardiovascular concerns, all of which come under the somatic crisis. But there's also a psyche crisis, a soul crisis, a suke crisis, anxiety and reports of elevated anxiety and depression and attachment issues and loss and grief are realities based upon empirically based evidence from this season. Concerns with increases in substance abuse and other unhealthy coping strategies are all things that can be related and co-occurring with this somatic bodily medical crisis. And then there is the pneumatological or the spiritual concerns that are related even in this postmodern COVID pandemic battling season. The existential themes. What is the meaning? As persons wrestle with why a pandemic? Why now? Why my family? Why that particular family? Is there any redemptive suffering, which is a strong theme in the theological tradition? If this is going to be, can it be exchanged or redeemed for something worthwhile? Is there logos, which means reason, rationale? Viktor Frankl talked about logos, or the therapy of logos, in Man's Search for Meaning, his classic book. So is there an ability to create a why for this how? things are happening in this pandemic. These are very existential, very spiritual themes. Where's the faith? Where's the hope? Where's the love? And can we survive this as beloved community? And how can we comfort each other and strengthen each other? And so I want to submit that these things are interconnected and related. And that is why this ecosystem is so very important, and that we re-envision each other as partners, which takes us to part two, which is recognizing the presentation of possible spiritual, psychological, and medical concerns. I want to submit to you some interesting data on the next screen that the church or faith communities, according to empirically or evidence-based research, some studies have reported an overall 7.6 year increased life expectancy for persons who regularly participate in a faith community. That's in a general kind of way, according to some studies done by Marks, Nesteruk, Swanson, and others. And overall, so the faith community is doing something right, is doing something. There is documented efficacy to the efforts of the faith community that pan out to report a 7.6 year increased life expectancy, again, for persons who regularly participate in faith community. That almost doubles for African-American communities and people of color who actively participate in faith communities. That same study reflects a 13.7 year increased life expectancy for African-Americans and other people of color who actively participate in faith communities. So again, the evidence-based research is clear that faith communities do make a difference, and the efficacy of our efforts are documented. And yet we still live in a society where 20.6 or 1 in 5 adults have experienced mental illness. 1 in 20 have experienced serious mental illness, and 16.5% of youth have experienced a mental health disorder. And it's very possible that some of these persons in these demographics may be in our houses of worship, in our place of faith. I often say in other occasions that we may be the closest thing to mental health intervention that many parishioners ever encounter. That's not necessarily a goal, but it is a reality. And so how well are we prepared to be aware of this so that we can serve our parishioners in the best possible way? And the hypotheses, just before we move on, the hypothesis is that if we already, as faith communities, are affecting the life expectancy by 13.7 years for specific demographics, and then 7.6 years, that's 7.6 more years of life, of love, of being able to be around family and friends and to make a difference in the world. And if we're already doing that, how much more can we raise that life expectancy through initiatives like this? And so that's our goal and our prayer. So how can we do that? Well, some ways, certainly not exhaustive, but the American Psychiatric Association in a 2016 publication on mental health, a guide for faith leaders, gives us some very helpful, a very helpful substratum for being able to do this. And just as faith leaders, we can be aware of the cognition, the effect, the speech, the thought patterns, and the appearance of our parishioners, just in a after the worship service greeting, or between a social moment, or a Zoom call, a Zoom meeting in this pandemic situation in which we have to engage each other electronically. We can still keep connection, but we should be sensitive to cognition. That means awareness of self and others and time and place. Be aware of affect or mood. Are the persons we're engaging, do they appear to be sad, depressed, overly spirited, overwhelmed by the cares of life? We can be attentive to speech. Are the parishioners and those in our faith community speaking too slowly, quickly, or slurred speech? We can be sensitive to thought patterns. Are there racing or disconnected thoughts, bizarre ideas, expressions of delusional thinking, are things to which we could be sensitive? And then finally, appearance. Other persons to whom we're meeting, and I know in this era it's most likely by way of a Zoom worship service, a virtual worship encounter, or a worship meeting, but are they disheveled in appearance, inappropriate in dress, poor hygiene? It's hard to discern that in some senses, or the inability to sit and stand still. These are some of the things to which we can be sensitive, just as faith leaders and even faith community looking out for each other. The next screen shows how it can also apply to the other side, if you will, of our partnership. Dr. Christina Polchowski has done some great work at the Institute of Spirituality and Health at the GW School of Medicine, and actually came up with the same kind of assessment, kind of criteria for mental health professionals to assess how important faith is in the life of a client, arguing that it is important for mental health professionals to recognize and respect the role that faith has in the lives of clients. Her FICA model is an acrostic for faith importance community assessment, which means that Dr. Puchalski recommends that even mental health professionals in the general intake assessment process may want to consider asking questions like a faith question. Do you consider yourself spiritual or religious? The I is for importance. What beliefs help you to cope with stress or to give your life meaning? The C stands for faith community, just as a part of a general intake assessment. Are you part of a spiritual or religious community? And then the A of the FICA is for action, where the therapist asks, would you like for me to address any spiritual or faith matters? And so there's this interchange. While it is certainly not necessary for therapists to be theologians or for theologians to be mental health professionals, it is helpful to have at least a rudimentary awareness of the significance of those things. Dr. Puchalski argues quite well, so that we can serve our parishioners in the best possible way. That takes us to recognition requires raising awareness together. That means we can learn about faith and mental health through forums like this one. And I think it's so important for us as faith practitioners and professionals and mental health professionals to be aware, for faith professionals to know certain things about spiritual crises that may present as mental health concerns, and even for therapists to be culturally competent and aware of issues in multicultural counseling, which includes the role of faith in the life of a client. So we have to learn about it. We have to talk about mental health. We have to talk about faith and mental health. There's an interesting passage of scripture, again, in Hebrews that talks about the word of God being quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword. Then it goes on to say that it discerns and makes the difference, and discerns between, it says, soul and spirit, like bone and marrow. Soul and spirit, pneuma and psyche, it says, is like bone and marrow. What an interesting metaphor, because bone and marrow are so intertwined that one is literally engulfed and encased in the other. And that same connection is made in that particular passage in Hebrews between soul and spirit. So as much as we would, that's why the compartmentalization creates limitations because we're so intertwined in the biblical wisdom that coming together in partnership at least seems to be the only way to kind of really ensure that we can give maximum care. So we have to talk about it. We have to teach about it. We have to preach about it. There are plenty of references to mental health. While the Bible is certainly not, or sacred texts are not necessarily books on mental health, they do address matters. David feigns illness in the Judeo-Christian tradition. David feigns mental illness to receive mercy from his Philistine adversaries. Isaiah talks about being in perfect peace by keeping our minds focused on the empowering presence of God. Jesus heals a man in Mark 5 until he is clothed and in his right mind. And Mark in his gospel talks about Jesus helping a boy who was suffering with seizures and had really attempted suicide. He threw himself into the water and threw himself into the flood, trying to rid himself of this suffering. And Jesus healed him. The Pauline epistles talk about letting this mind be in you and the peace of God guarding our heart. And so that is they are some of the kinds of ways in which we as faith leaders can integrate mental health awareness into our general hermeneutics and our practice in homiletics. And so we advocate for matters of faith and mental health is a way that I suggest we can raise awareness together. So recognition also requires, as you see on the next screen, preparedness to serve as triage agents. Triage is an interesting word. It's from the French verb trier, which literally means to separate and sort out. It brings an interesting conversation because, again, we are often, as faith leaders, the frontline people. And I'm reminded of a conversation in an interview with several doctors, including Dr. Shirley Z and a cohort of other physicians. And Dr. Z said something interesting in her interview. She said, in talking about the COVID pandemic situation, she said, we are not the front lines of first responders. She said, we are often the last line of defense, because by the time it gets to us, it is critical, a matter of life and death. And that just provoked an interesting question in this pandemic age. Then is it possible that as faith leaders, we are oftentimes the first responders to the presentation of mental health concerns, trauma, various presentations of trauma in familial, interdependent, and individual contexts? And if so, how well are we, and what can we do to be better agents of triage, to be able to send this person here and send this person there? An interesting study from the Barna Research Group finds that in times of emotional or relationship crises, 53% of people of faith turned to a loved one, and about 35% of adults turned to a faith leader. I'll say that again. Barna's research indicates that in times of emotional or relationship crises, the first responders that people solicit, 53% of people in the faith community turn to a loved one, and 35% of adults turn to a faith leader. That's already at 88% of persons who are turning to family and or faith leaders in times of emotionally traumatic experience, already at 88%. So we are indeed first responders, and this triage premise becomes so very important, because sometimes we are called and used not to be the immediate facilitators of healing, but to be the connectors, the community connectors, to say, I know where you need to go. Even though, as Jesus said, go show yourself to the priest. And so sometimes we need to be able to do this triage, to recognize certain things and send people where they can get help. which really brings me to the third and final part of my presentation. And I solicit and look forward to your feedback, but referring persons for specialized care. We've talked about re-envisioning, we've talked about recognition, and now I want to talk finally about referring persons for specialized care. The working thesis is that recognizing thresholds of referral and building professional relationships are critical to maximizing collaborative efforts. Collaborative efforts means that referrals can be mutual. Again, going back to Archie Smith's statement that sometimes we can get lost in competition and extreme compartmentalization and one-upmanship because of the necessities of the division of labor. But might we consider a paradigm when collaboration means mutual referral? Dr. Dana Chari, I echo his suggestion that these 5 things should be instantly considered for referral to mental health collaboration by faith leaders when we encounter brain disease, such as Alzheimer's or dementia, psychosis, delusional thinking, and out of touch with reality, severe depression, substance abuse, or suicidality. Those 5 are, in Dr. Cherry's estimation, with which I concur, automatic strong considerations for collaborative efforts and referrals as faith leaders. Similarly, taken from Dr. Puchalski's work and the work of Ferguson, it's also can be said that there are times when in a therapeutic session, existential or spiritual themes may present themselves. Why is this happening to me? Why would God allow me to have this kind of trauma? Why me and not my neighbor? Or why my neighbor and not me? When we start getting into those whys and what Tillich called the ultimate concerns of life, and wondering about religious creeds and codes, then we're getting into very theological discussions. The person feels lonely, that's where that FICA assessment or that faith assessment could be helpful. I saw in your assessment that faith community is important to you. Is there anyone that you're able to hang out with, at least by technology? You say you're feeling lonely in this pandemic and in a quarantine. Does your faith community meet online? And is that beneficial to you? How's that working for you? And so these are ways in which we can integrate and interact in ways that can be in the best interest of those to whom we are giving care. The main point is that we have distinct yet complementary caregivers in the therapeutic presence and in the pastoral care presence. Distinct yet very complementary, and that's why this collaboration is so important. In therapeutic care, some things in which, if you will, if I take a faith position, that both can be instruments of grace, but the therapist can be an instrument of grace in a particular way. There are codes of professional intimacy, limited to no self-disclosure. Therapists are generally trained to be cautious because of concerns of transference and counter-transference, and for the sensitivity, particularly in the Rogerian tradition of client-based care. So there can be some very limited or caution exercised in terms of self-disclosure. There's an accountability to state, and the big deal is, of course, having consent. And that is some of the ways in which therapists are instruments of grace. In distinction, pastoral caregivers are sometimes encouraged, as opposed to professional intimacy, to engage in personal transparency. Sometimes we share our testimonies. The interesting thing is you may never know the marital status or relationship status of your professional therapist, but you oftentimes may see your faith leader bring his or her family to church, you see, or to mosque or synagogue, you may see them age. You see them deal with different life crises. You see oftentimes perhaps their children go from pediatrics to full-grown children. You see them go off to college, and it's a different kind of testimony. Just as when we read the scriptures, we are made privy to the lives and the challenges and the strengths of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Paul, Peter, James, John. We are made aware of certain nuances in their personal life as a part of the public witness in how God uses that to even be a source of strength to us. Because sometimes we learn what to do, and sometimes we learn what not to do. But there are different ways that God uses these two different areas. And so consent is certainly important. In pastoral care, consecration is a matter because they are creeds and beliefs and codes. And so the point is that they are distinct yet complementary caregivers. And there's an interesting verse in 1 Corinthians when Paul says to the church was in the habit of saying, some of them said, we like Paul better. And then the other half of the church said, we like Apollos better. And they both were teachers, but there was a different grace on the lives of each of them. But the people were in the habit of saying, we like Paul. And then the other half was like, we like Apollos. We like these over here. We like this guy. We like that guy. And Paul says in Corinthians, actually, all things are yours. You can reap the benefits of the grace that is put in Paul, and you can reap the benefits of the grace that is put in Apollos. I want to use that sort of as a parallel to say that we can maximize the grace that is in therapeutic care and maximize the grace that is in pastoral care, because all things are ours for our wellness, is the point. Which brings me finally to this pastoral paradigm for critical collaboration. Again, I know it looks a little bit like neutrons and electrons. It's kind of like a chemistry thing going on here. But the idea is to surround the parishioner, if you will, as a faith leader, the goal with sensitivity to all of these things, pastoral care, of course, and the ways that God uses the pastor or the faith leader, and then creating a theology of mental health. So it's okay theologically. Hey, listen, our theological tradition is aware of the impact of the stresses of life on our minds, on our cognitive, emotional wellness. The Bible addresses certain things that are traumatic. The Judeo-Christian tradition, so it's so very important to have this theology of mental health that we're willing to share. And then rapport with mental health professionals. There are a few that I use in this area, the Renaissance mental health counseling services, Hope Health Systems. There are a few of those that I use. And when I make a referral as a pastor, it's someone with whom I have a relationship. I know this group. It's not a compulsion. You don't have to go, but if you're asking me, or if I can provide, here's some people whom I know have a certain measure of cultural competence in multicultural counseling, sensitivity and awareness, and at the same time are able to give you the help you need and some specialized areas of care. And so that rapport with the mental health professionals, I think, is so very important, that we are able to engage in conversation to just understand each other, not violating HIPAA or any of that, but just a basic understanding that, hey, I may be sending some people to you. Staff or outsource. Some churches are in a position, or houses of faith are in a position, some synagogues, some mosques, you may be in a position, depending on size and resources, to staff mental health persons, or to at least start a mental health awareness ministry that talks about some of these things in terms of rudimentary awareness of thresholds of referral. And then refer as needed, which is basically the premise of critical collaboration. If we can surround them with this care, we'll be in great a better shape and maybe improve that life expectancy statistic we quoted earlier. And so that basically is it. And I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to share. Look forward to having rapport with you. Please feel free to reach out. I welcome any additional insight. Director Graves said it so well at the beginning. This is not exhaustive. These are just some things to provoke thought and critical conversation that makes us all stronger and better. So if there are findings that you find to be helpful, I would love to hear from them and add to this dialogue for the improvement of us all. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share on this critical subject.
Thank you so much, Bishop Robinson. There were several questions put in the chat, many of which you have answered, but I'm going to ask a few. And then just as a reminder, you are absolutely welcome to put in the Q&A. If you have questions for Bishop Robinson in his presentation, please put them in the Q&A and I'll make sure that we get them. And I do see a hand raised, but I'm wondering, oh, you could probably unmute yourself. Look at that. Anyway, so let me just say this first. I do want to share that this is the first in the series, and this series, it starts with us building dynamic congregational mental health teams is meant to kind of build one to the other on each other. And so what Bishop Robinson has done today is built a really great foundation. So in a little bit, I'll tell you about the next webinar that we have next week, which goes into a little bit more detail in terms of building out your mental health team. But I will turn to the questions. Actually, if possible, Robinson, I just saw Angela, sorry, Rev Burton. I don't know if can you unmute yourself and ask your question? I don't know if you're able to.
Hello, this is Rev Burton. I'm sorry, I am babysitting my 20-month-old grandson and he hit the button by mistake. Thank you so much, Bishop Robinson. It's been a blessing to hear from you. I'm at New Metropolitan, and so we're already in relationship. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Well, at least we know that this is a feature. I didn't know it was possible. Okay, so let me, Bishop Robinson, let me get to a few questions that were teased out. Like you hinted, you circled around the questions, but I'm going to ask them directly, and maybe you can feed someone some really great information. So one of the first questions that I want to read is, what role does stigma play in the framework you discussed today? And Stigma is we're an anti-stigma organization, right? So I guess if you can just explain what stigma is and then explain the role, just in case someone doesn't know, explain how that might, how that plays out in this system where you're telling faith leaders that they should become partners with their mental health professionals and trying to be more open in their congregations. But what role does stigma play in that?
Yes. Stigma is a mark in its literal sense, a mark sometimes associated with disgrace or shame. But the stigma in mental health and these kinds of subjects is something that we're really trying to come against, for that better way to say that. And the way you have to do that, one of the ways, is by having honest conversation. What you don't confront, you cannot heal. And so we have to have forthright conversation in which the adage is, it's okay to say I'm not okay. And that is a very realistic part of the human experience. And then to know that help is available. And there's nothing wrong with getting help because we all need help. And there are various ways that we can do that. So again, as you said, we're laying the philosophical substratum for some applied praxis that will come in the weeks to follow. But first, you have to create that culture of transparency to say it's okay. That helps remove the stigma.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And the next question kind of builds on that just a little bit. Well, just a little bit. So what mental health trends have you seen in your work with the community over the last year?
of course, it's been consistent with some of the findings in terms of, particularly because the past year has been contextualized by the pervasive reality of the pandemic. And so there has been I see the increased anxiety. Persons are spending more time at home, and for everybody, unfortunately, safer at home is not the most applicable adage. It may be true medically in terms of the soma, as we talked about, but in terms of the psyche and the mind, if there were already pre-existing issues for which being out of the home was an escape, well, now in the home is living with it and it's exacerbating. So that anticipatory grief, anticipatory anxiety, even the pandemic itself, COVID has a stigma with it in some findings. And so embarrassment and those kind of things. So there's some of the things we're finding, in addition to, I finally do have to say, the socioeconomic realities, particularly when you serve parishioners who are more in the service-oriented industries for whom staying home is not an option or affects their pay. And financial stress can be a mental health trigger as well. So all of those things are present and realities.
No, that's wonderful. And I appreciate that you teased it out that way, because that's certainly something we see, or we certainly hear on the help calls that we get on our helpline, that we're safe at home, socially safe, but we still have issues that we need to address, and we need help addressing them at home as we're being confronted by them. So I have two other questions. One of them is, it's definitely related to your diagram, one of your last diagrams that you showed, when you said the different ways that we can engage and be more helpful to our congregants. And one of the things that you said is consult with or bring in, and I'm paraphrasing, bring in mental health professionals, depending on your ability to do that. And in our next webinar, we're going to delve right into that. But some of the questions that I'm kind of seeing are kind of similar. Everyone, if I'm not quite hitting the mark, I apologize. But how can mental health professionals be better linked to faith organizations, and how can faith organizations seek out, if they're just starting out and they have some resources, but not maybe a lot, they can hire a person, how can they partner with each other, at least just initially? How can that even start? Yes,
I would, a verse comes to mind, pardon me for proof texting, but you know, it's a vocational hazard. There's a passage of scripture that says, he that desires friends must show themselves friendly. And so I want to say that it starts with us as professionals being intentional and strategic and open to relationship building so that those referrals can happen. Pastors are connectors by spiritual mandate. We have connection to the community, and yet we don't know everything, but we do have resources. And so that kind of mutual respect for each other and what we do. God uses us differently, again, as we tried to elucidate in that two different things, you know, professional intimacy, pastoral transparency, all those kind of things. Uses us differently, but he uses us effectively if we coordinate, collaborate, bring persons in, and even like this forum. This is NAMI bringing in a faith leader, and then it can also be faith leaders bringing in someone else, but it's that kind of relationship that is intentional and strategic that will help to bring us together, I would say.
Okay. And one last question for you, and then I'll turn it over. There are questions in the chat that are more suited for NAMI Metro that I'm going to get to. I do see the Q&As, so I will get to those. But the last question really is a continuation of the previous question that I asked you, which is, how can we encourage congregants to seek help if they are reluctant? So that's the first part. And I'll ask you the second part in a second.
Okay. I go back to teaching is everything. Teaching and any pedagogue that may be watching knows that you can literally change the trajectory of a person's life by education, by exposure, And then there are different styles of pedagogy. There are different vessels, and certain people take to certain personalities a little quicker than others, but educating on the matter biblically, that's why I mentioned that Bible does have something to say about trauma, as do other sacred texts. And so it's so very important to be able to present that. And it may not happen overnight. It's not an event, it's a process. And so we have to stay in that process and keep the faith, really.
And then the last part of that question, before I move on to answering some questions that are suited for NAMI Metro, is what role do faith leaders play after the referrals have been made?
That's a great question. I use this analogy that by our faith convictions, any faith leader has basically taken pretty much an oath based upon their faith position to be, if you will, the general practitioner of soul care, caring for the psyche in a general sense, just like I have a general medical practitioner. But every now and then, he runs an EKG or something else, he may say, hey, I'm going to send you to this cardiac specialist. And that person does certainly give extensive care in that area. But my main primary care physician is my primary care physician. I would answer that question by saying that a faith leader is the primary soul care provider. So it doesn't exclude, but it just brings in the help that is necessary in a particular area of expertise.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for those answers. And then the final questions are directed to NAMI Metro. And actually, these are right on time. I believe there's a clinician and two other faith leaders who are asking the same question. And so to the matter of how can clergy, what list can clergy find to be able to help give really great referrals if they're trying to rebuild their referral system? And that's, it's sort of a simple-ish answer, only because we, NAMI Metro Baltimore, we spend a lot of time getting, building out our helpline to be full of resources that will directly include organizations who do nothing but give really great referrals to clinicians themselves, or other support and help organizations. So at the end of this series, at the end of actually sometime in June, if you are so inclined, I will make available our what we call a mental health toolkit, faith leader toolkit, which has the quick and dirty basic information on a lot of information that you need to know right now, and then how you can build out really great resources, where you can go to give great resources like Psychology Today to give good referrals or get good referrals, and Black Mental Health Alliance, who exclusively connects Black Americans who want to see other Black clinicians. If you go to Black Mental Health Alliance, and I think it's bmha.org. I think I'm wrong on that, but it's Google Black Mental Health Alliance, or Nova or Jamie, if you could be so kind as to put in the chat the actual website for them, I'd appreciate it, because now I'm self-conscious. But it's Black Mental Health Alliance, and they will give exclusive referrals for Black Americans who want to see Black American clinicians. Really great resource. And if you are serving folks who are not Black Americans, again, there are different resources out there where you can give good referrals. If you are clinicians yourselves and you want to engage with churches, it's forums like this that we can be connectors in that respect. But yeah, it's goes right back to what Bishop Robinson was saying. We kind of need to make ourselves available to each other. And while you probably only have the chat where you guys can talk to each other now, we will have to work together to create more opportunities for you to be open and engaging. But yeah, in our small way as NAMI Metro, we can be a convener between these two helping professions, as we like to say, and these helping professions, by at the very least linking you to really great resources. And we spent a lot of time, NAMI Metro, we spent a lot of time curating and culling our list to make sure that our resources are really good. So at the end of the day, you can come to us and we can then turn around and share really great info. So again, if you are interested in having a hard copy or a digital copy of our faith toolkit, I will just shoot me an email, or I will directly send all of the attendees a direct email asking if you want that information, and I'll make it available to you in the way that makes sense. And Jamie and Nova, I'm not sure if there are any other questions. So while I wait to see if there are any other questions, I do want to note that there is a small poll that I need you, if you can, please, when I launch it, it's just 6 questions. I just need you to check those boxes just to make sure that I have really good data so that it can inform future sessions. Certainly, if you have any wonderful comments that you'd like to share about Bishop Robinson and his presentation, you're more than welcome to share those. We will also make this presentation available if you would like a copy of that. More than that, this recording will be made available on our website following this session here today. So it looks like I see a bunch of thank yous in the chat. Everyone is so very thankful, Bishop Robinson, for all the great information that you shared. It's clear that you spend a lot of time teaching and you break it down in a way that makes sense. And I really appreciate you for spending this time with us. And so if there are no further, I'm sure there's a ton of other questions. Oh, I got them all. Yay, look at me. Anyway, so, but I know that will be other questions later. So we will make sure that we get those questions to Bishop Robinson so that you can connect with him and be able to build your mental health team in the way that makes sense. But for now, I will launch this poll. And so no matter the device that you're on, your tablet, your phone, your laptop, it should populate instantly. And it's just 6 questions. If it does not, you can email me and I will happily administer that survey to you. So, and I am launching it now. And thank you in advance. Thank you so much in advance for filling the survey out. And once again, Bishop Robinson, the chat is just full of thank yous, just full of a ton of thank yous, and that they'll be in touch. You gave really great information. And so again, thank you for putting my email in the chat. And again, I have launched the poll. So, perfect. Thank you all. Thank you so much for doing this survey. Thank you so much. And Carmi Flood, thank you so much. I know you shared our information, Carmi, so thank you so much for attending today too. We appreciate you and everything that you do. And any of you, if you shared the link to our free webinar, thank you so much. I'm noticing that there are names that I haven't seen before. So thank you so much for sharing that link. Feel free to come on back next session where we will have Reverend Dominic Smith, who will be talking about, oh shucks, I've already stopped sharing. So let me escape really quickly. Let me escape to tell you what the presentation will be, because now I'm nervous. So it's Mental Health Matters, Building Effective Mental Health Ministries. And so I know ministries is for the most part a Christian term, but just know that he's will be definitely coming from a holistic kind of interfaith perspective. So thank you to everyone who filled out this poll. At this time, it is 11:59, and I'll give it like 60 more seconds. Well, not 60 seconds. Oh yes, perfect, thank you. At 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, I will shut this down. Thank you so much, everyone, for your diligence in attending. We will see you next week. Oh, thank you, Melinda Barber. Thank you. Oh, and happy Cinco de Mayo for all who celebrate it. Happy Cinco de Mayo tomorrow. Yes, Melinda, you reminded me. Thank you. All right. Okay, and good afternoon, everyone. Enjoy this beautiful weather.